Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And summarizing everything that been taking place for the previous 24 hours, we can make a conclusion that the situation for the European politicals and Zelensky himself is very critical. Neither European politicals nor Zelensky knows what to do next. The situation is difficult, they are shocked, the situation is critical, and most likely today, for the first time maybe since the beginning of the special military operation, Zelensky has begun being afraid for his own life. For example, today Zelensky stated that it's not very pleasant. In fact, it's not very pleasant, Zelensky said, commenting on Trump's first call, calling Putin and only then him. Calls are calls, I understand everything, but meetings for us are a priority between Ukraine and America, and only after such meetings developing a plan on how to stop Putin, then it will be fair to talk to the Russians, he stated. So that was obviously a very huge and very big shock for Zelensky that Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin first and then he called him. But probably the biggest shock is that Donald Trump talked with Putin for 90 minutes and he talked with him just for 7 minutes. I'm not even sure what kind of information you can provide for 7 minutes, just to understand how are you, what were you doing, what were you eating during the day, and that's it. Another important thing that I'll remind you that these days the United States presented Ukraine with a draft agreement on natural resources. Zelensky met with the US Secretary of the Treasury. Zelensky met with the US Secretary of the Treasury and said that a draft agreement on natural resources prepared by the US was handed over at the meeting. He clarified that this only concerns resources that are located in the territory controlled by Ukraine. The agreement may be signed either at the Munich conference on February 14 or 16 or even earlier. It was previously announced that US Secretary of the Treasury would ask Zelensky where the funding allocated by the US to Ukraine went. And right after the conversation between Putin and Trump, Zelensky refused to sign this agreement. Zelensky did not sign the financial agreement on the rare earth minerals that US Treasury Secretary Bezant brought to him. This is very important because basically this is the answer to the question whether the United States of America will be able ever to return money they spent to support Kiev, to support Zelensky. And obviously the answer is no. Zelensky will not give even a single dollar to the United States of America. Maybe he will try to give some money to European countries, maybe he will try to find another solution, but obviously not a single dollar. And the sources are saying, and different military experts and political experts reported, that that was his biggest mistake. Now let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact. During the previous 24 hours we got a lot of very interesting updates. We haven't received almost nothing when talking, almost anything when talking about changes on the ground, just a lot of videos, a lot of FPV drone attacks as usually, some progress, some developments on the ground. And for example, in this video we can see how the Russians managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of the settlement of Nikolsky, and then the Russians attacked this territory with a significant number of Iskander missiles. Most likely, the temporary deployment point or this stronghold was completely destroyed. Maybe the Russians are planning to begin another attempt to attack these positions. The situation for the Ukrainians in this area is very difficult. Another attack carried out by the Russian side can lead to complete collapse of the Ukrainian defense. You know that now Zelensky is staying in his Kiev, remembers Biden and remembers his last military aids he sent in December, in November, and currently the situation and let's read in quotes, the stable situation along the line of combat contact we can see right now is obviously thanks to Joe Biden that sent a lot of weapons in November, in December. But sooner or later this weapon will be finished and then nobody can predict how the situation is going to develop. According to information we have, both Donald Trump and Putin wants to finish the special military operation and finish this war by the 20th of April, which means that there are still up to 2 months of very heavy clashes along the entire line of combat contact, and nobody knows is what is going to happen tomorrow. By the way, today we got another very important statement from the units of the 79th Air Mobile Brigade. They published very interesting article. The events, we are talking about the phone call between Putin and Trump and Zelensky. The events provoked the command to issue a decree banning mobile phones on the front line in order to prevent the deterioration of the morale of the armed forces of Ukraine fighters and an unstable information situation. We order to exclude the use ban of all means of communication with internet access. You know that this is very important statement because yesterday the Ukrainians were living in completely different reality. They were living in the reality when the Western countries, the United States of America, were helping them to restore control over Ukraine in borders of 1991. And tomorrow, this morning, up to 600,000 Ukrainian soldiers or even more woke up this morning and they realized that they are no longer fighting with the most powerful ally in the world, the United States of America. They are not fighting for the borders of 1991, and maybe there is no reason to fight at all, because maybe the only reason they are fighting for is Zelensky, but nobody says that these soldiers want to fight for Zelensky. And this is very important because now every time when another soldier receives an order to attack this or that position, he will understand that most likely this or that attack is useless and most likely he will be killed as a result of maybe Russian sniper fire. So maybe there is no need to attack, but maybe it's better to wait. It's better to wait when the situation will be resolved. So this is what happens along the entire line of combat contact when talking about Ukrainian soldier. And just imagine yourself how the Russian soldiers were inspired by this call. We're not talking about the Russian economy. We have already discussed this during the previous video, that the entire Russian market, stock market, is green. Everything is rising. Russians earning a lot of money. The Russians, most important, are earning a lot of money to finance the special military operation. So this is the worst probably issue for the armed forces of Ukraine. Once again, as for the Sudra direction, just to regular activities, a lot of Russian FPV drone strikes, a lot of Iskander strikes. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian forces without changes on the ground. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk area. After short operational pause, the Russians resumed their cleaning operations, and we see that the Russians sent their drones deep inside of the territory under complete Ukrainian control with the purpose to check Ukrainian positions, to destroy vehicles, to destroy positions, FPV drone positions. So we see that slowly, step by step, but this direction is taking momentum, is gaining momentum, and most likely when the Russians finish this clearing operation, they will begin another full-scale offensive that most likely will be finished somewhere by the 20th of April, when the parties will sign some draft agreement. As for the southern Kupiansk direction, the most important updates are coming from the Liman area. According to different pro-Russian resources, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the southwest of Nevska. So we see that the Russians are trying to attack the settlement of Novolyubovka from the south. The main purpose of these activities along the river of Zherebets is to connect two footholds of the Russian armed forces. The first one was created several weeks ago to the west of Makiivka. The second one was created at the same time to the west of Ivanovka. Now the Russians want to connect these two positions and then to move further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. As you can see, despite the conversation with Trump, despite the panic of Zelensky, despite everything, the Russians continue the war because they understand that all these talks, all these calls, all these things may be just a trap to win some time for the armed forces of Ukraine. And if they win some time, maybe then they will bring more weapon, and then the situation for the Russians will be much worse. So that's why they're relying just on three things: weapon, weapon, and weapon once again. According to information we have, the Russians intensified their activities in the vicinity of the city by the name of Chasiv Yar. The clashes for this stronghold haven't been finished yet, but despite the very difficult and sometimes critical situation in the central part of the city of Chasiv Yar, the Russians have already sent drones much further the border of the settlement. We have a lots of icons, we have a lots of episodes, videos of how the Russians were hunting, attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicles around the city of Chasiv Yar. So we have the same situation in the north in Kupiansk direction. Most likely the Russians haven't finished the battle for the city, but now they began preparing the plans before further advancing, before further attacks in the direction of Fyodorovka, in the direction of the settlement by the name of Konstantinovka. As for the city of Toretsk, during the previous 24 hours we got probably just one important video from the northern mine. I'll remind you that since the beginning of the special military operation, since the beginning of assault operation of this area, we haven't received even a single confirmation that the Russians established complete control over the mine, over the northern mine. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation confirmed control over this territory, and just today on the 30th of February the Russians published the video with the Russian flag. So from this territory we haven't adjusted anything based on this video, we just confirmed once again Russian complete control over this territory. Probably the most important updates for the previous 24 hours are coming from Konstantinovka direction. Today, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation and defense sources confirmed that the Russians, as a result of another offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Vadiane Druge. Based on this report, we have adjusted the map. These territories used to be considered as a contested area or the gray zone. Now we have no doubts that the village was captured by the Russians, and we see that currently the Russians are trying to take in pincers, the settlement of Tarasovka. The Russians are attacking this area from the southwest, and the Russians are advancing in the same direction from the southeast. The main purpose of the Russians is to take everything under complete control in this pocket. If they can do this, they will become a bit closer to the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir, and the Russians will get a bit closer to create another cauldron for the armored force of Ukraine in this pocket. There are still a lot of job to do before this cauldron happens, but obviously the Russians are approaching. As for the Pokrovsk direction, the situation is very critical here. We have several geolocations that confirm Russian presence maybe on some outskirts of the settlement of Kotlina, and probably the most important video is coming from the settlement of Pishane. In this video we can see how a Russian soldier was moving through the settlement of Pishane. We see that he was in a hurry. Obviously the Ukrainians could attack him with FPV drone. We see that the Russians tried to hide in some basements, maybe because they discovered the approach of FPV drone. Anyway, this episode took place exactly in this point, and based on this video we have adjusted this part. This territory was considered as a contested area. Now we have no doubts that as a result of counterattacks, the Russians managed to restore control over some part of the settlement of Pishane. I'll remind you that the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation maybe a month ago reported that the settlement of Pishane was completely captured by the Russians. The settlement was secured. Then the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks, and as a result of counterattacks, the Ukrainians restored control over this territory. And now we see that the Russians have started everything from the beginning. Now let's move further and let's discuss the Dnipro direction. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Zaporizhzhia. This information was provided us by pro-Russian resources. As for now, we don't have any geolocation that can confirm this, and we see that the Russians managed to shorten the distance to the border of the region once again. As for the Andreevka fortified area, as you can see, we have a lot of icons. The Russians managed to tighten the noose once again. They managed to improve their positions on every single roads of attack. The Russians established additional control over the tree lines to the southwest of the settlement of Dachny. We have geolocation that can confirm this. The Russians improved their positions to the north of Zelenovka. This information was provided us by pro-Russian resources, and the Russians managed to reach the western outskirts of Andreevka. This information was also provided us by pro-Russian resources. As for this cauldron itself, as you can see, we also got lots of icons. The Russians currently bombing and attacking the settlement of Volakli, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to use this settlement for evacuation purposes. Now, after the fall of Dashna, the town of Volakli is the edge position of the armored forces of Ukraine, and the battle for this settlement is going to start in the very near future. As for the Velika Novoselovka direction, I'll remind you that several days ago, the armed forces of Russian Federation began another full-scale offensive operation in the northern and the northwestern direction, and as a result of clashes during the previous several days, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. Now we see that the dynamic in this area is getting very fast. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 9th of February, so the Russians were very far from the current positions. By the end of the 10th of February, the Russians improved their positions between Razdolny and Novokamar, so we understand that the Russians were trying to move further in this direction. By the end of the 11th of February, the Russians took under control northwestern part of Velika Novosilka, and they managed to cross the river and to get as close as possible to this company stronghold. And by the end of the 12th of February, the Russians improved their positions along the 0510 road, and by the end of the 30th of February, the Russians managed to capture additional 3 lines. The Russians are moving, and we see that Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation. And probably the most interesting updates are coming from the Zaporozhye direction. Today, the international organization that's checked the nuclear power plants was planning to visit the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. But during this rotation process, according to pro-Russian resources, the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking this organization, the workers and engineers and inspectors of this organization with artillery, with FPV drones, trying to force to stop this rotation process and to force this organization to fall back. You know that this is very interesting situation, because according to information we have, this is the second attempt from this organization, international organization, to make rotation on the territory of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, and the second time in a row the Ukrainians, according to the Russian sources, managed to break this process. Why I'm saying you this, why I'm pointing your attention to this situation, according to information we have, Zelensky has a plan. If everything goes very bad, he has a plan B to use everything he has with the purpose to attack the city of Energodar, with the purpose to restore control over Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and to hold these positions as long as possible until the end of the negotiation process. So that is why we believe that this situation with rotation was created, I don't know, maybe either by the Russians or by the Ukrainians, with the reason. I see that somebody doesn't want international organization to enter the territory of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, because somebody doesn't want maybe to reveal his own position or to discover his upcoming plans. So once again, this situation with rotation is very important, and I believe that we can start counting days when the Ukrainians are going to attack in the direction of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Now I have no doubts that this is going to happen in the very near future. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.